every single person currently receiving Social Security benefits and every person who will receive them in the future is staring down a cut to their monthly payment. That is not my opinion. That comes directly from the Social Security Trustees Report and the Congressional Record. Various analyses differ slightly on the precise timing. Some projections land a few months sooner, some a few months later, with minor percentage differences depending on the assumptions used, but the core finding is consistent across every credible analysis. Based on the most recent trustees report, you have approximately 81 more checks at your current amount, and then the 82nd check gets reduced by 23%. Why is this happening? Because our elected representatives have done nothing meaningful to address it in over 40 years. And why haven't they acted? Because we have not pushed hard enough to make them. That responsibility sits directly with us. Politicians are extraordinarily skilled at telling us exactly what we want to hear the moment we contact them, offering just enough reassurance to send us back home feeling satisfied, and then doing absolutely nothing the moment we hang up. We have been falling for that pattern repeatedly, for decades. So today, we are going through the most common things politicians say about Social Security. 12 myths they recycle constantly to keep us confused, disengaged, and passive. I have put together a reference sheet that covers all 12 of them. I will drop it in the description and in the comments so you can download it and have it in your hand the next time you attend a town hall meeting or pick up the phone to contact your representative. Let us go through all 12. Myth number 1, Social Security is going bankrupt. This is completely and demonstrably false. Social Security is not going bankrupt. It will exist for generations, potentially for centuries, unless there is a deliberate political decision to hand it over to private financial interests, which, not coincidentally, is precisely why certain politicians prefer inaction over solutions. Keeping the public confused and worried serves a specific political purpose. As long as Americans are working and contributing through payroll taxes, Social Security will continue paying out benefits. Right now, roughly 91% of every check you receive comes directly from current workers paying into the system. The remaining approximately 9% comes from the trust fund. That trust fund percentage will gradually increase over the coming years as the gap between what comes in and what goes out continues to widen. And eventually, that 23% buffer disappears entirely. That is where the projected benefit cut originates. But the program itself continues paying a percentage of promised benefits indefinitely. It does not stop. It does not close its doors. Going bankrupt and facing a benefit reduction are two entirely different things, and conflating them deliberately is one of the oldest tricks in the political playbook. Myth number 2, Congress raided the trust fund and stole the money. This one circulates endlessly on social media and in political conversations, and it simply is not accurate. All you have to do is read the Social Security Trustees Report. As of the end of 2023, the most recent figures available, the trust fund held $2.6 trillion. During that year, approximately $1.2 trillion came in through payroll contributions and interest earned on Treasury holdings. About $1.3 trillion went out in benefit payments. That roughly $100 billion shortfall was covered by drawing from the trust fund balance. The money is accounted for. It is visible and clearly documented in the annual reports. The stolen money narrative is a deliberate distraction that politicians deploy to deflect accountability and generate outrage. And it works remarkably well because most people never actually look at the underlying numbers. Myth number 3, those Treasury bonds are just worthless IOUs. If United States Treasury bonds were truly worthless, we would have problems that dwarf any conversation about Social Security by several orders of magnitude. Countries around the world park their national reserves in Treasury bonds specifically because they represent the most reliable financial instrument on the planet. A significant portion of most Americans' 401k accounts and pension funds are invested in Treasury bonds, particularly as people approach retirement age and shift toward more conservative holdings. If those bonds were to collapse in value, the entire global financial system would collapse alongside them. The Social Security Trust Fund is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. That is not a trivial thing. Treating it as worthless is either profound ignorance or deliberate misdirection. Myth number 4. Undocumented immigrants are draining Social Security. 100% false. And I can speak to this directly from my own experience working at the Social Security Administration. To receive Social Security benefits, you are legally required to demonstrate that you are in this country lawfully. The SAVE program, the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements program, cross-references every application with the Department of Homeland Security for verification. Undocumented individuals cannot receive Social Security retirement benefits, disability benefits, spousal benefits, Medicare, or Medicaid. Some states choose to provide certain healthcare services using state-level funding. That is a state's rights decision made at the state level, but none of that funding flows through federal Social Security dollars. Here is the part that almost never gets mentioned in this conversation. Undocumented workers actually contribute to Social Security. Many work using temporary tax identification numbers issued by the IRS, an agency that has no interest in immigration status, only in collecting taxes. Estimates suggest that roughly $30 billion flows into Social Security annually from workers who are not legally authorized to be in the country. None of them will ever collect a single dollar of that back. So the reality is the precise opposite of the myth. Undocumented workers are net contributors to the Social Security system, not recipients of it. A viewer question worth addressing right here. Before I continue through the myths, I want to address a question from a viewer that came in recently, because it is important enough and common enough to handle directly. She filed for surviving spouse benefits and received a denial letter stating she had not submitted all required documentation, even though she absolutely had submitted everything they asked for. The letter also states she will not receive future payments. She is worried this denial might affect her disability benefits and is asking for help. First, your disability benefits are completely separate from this situation. That denial has absolutely no connection to your disability payments. Those continue regardless of what happens with the surviving spouse claim. Do not worry about that piece. Here is what actually happened. When new administrative systems get rushed into operation without adequate preparation and testing, paperwork gets lost. That is what occurred here. The claims specialist should never have issued a formal denial for missing documentation without first making a direct effort to confirm whether the documents had actually been submitted and received. In my entire career at the Social Security Administration, handling hundreds of thousands of claims, I think I denied one person for lack of evidence. And that was only after every reasonable attempt to obtain the documentation had been fully exhausted. The standard professional approach is to contact the claimant and say, "I am still waiting on this particular document. Can you confirm its status?" That step was completely skipped here. The fix is straightforward. Call the Social Security Administration and inform them clearly that you submitted the required documentation. If they lost the originals, that is their responsibility to resolve, not yours. If you cannot get through to the local office, call the National 800 number and request what is called an MDW, a message directing the local office to review specifically why this claim was denied without proper outreach to the claimant first. This gets resolved. It is genuinely frustrating, and it absolutely should not have happened. But it is fixable. And this situation is a perfect illustration of what happens when staffing gets cut to the point where claims specialists are overwhelmed and procedural corners get cut. The systematic effort to make Social Security's customer service as frustrating and inaccessible as possible is not accidental. A program that people despise and distrust is far easier to dismantle politically than one that people value and depend on. Myth number 5, young people will get nothing from Social Security. This is a classic political tactic specifically designed to manufacture generational conflict. Pit younger workers against current retirees, get everyone furious at each other, and in the resulting chaos and division, nobody focuses attention on the people who are actually responsible for the problem. People have been saying Social Security will not be there for the next generation since 1935, the year the program was created. The identical argument was being made in the 1970s and again in the 1980s. It has never been true, and the underlying math does not support it now. Social Security will be around for a very long time. The genuine policy question, the one that actually deserves serious attention, is what percentage of the promised benefit ultimately gets paid. And that is an entirely solvable question if politicians choose to address it honestly rather than exploit it for electoral advantage. Myth number 6. Social Security is driving the national debt. Completely false, and the mechanics of the program make this impossible by design. Social Security is funded entirely through its own dedicated payroll tax revenue. It is legally prohibited from borrowing money from any source. It has no mechanism whatsoever through which it can contribute to the national debt. The program simply does not work that way. We are currently sitting at roughly $36 trillion in national debt. Social Security had precisely zero role in accumulating that figure. It operates in an entirely separate financial structure, with its own dedicated funding stream, its own dedicated tax revenue, and its own $2.6 trillion reserve fund. The two systems are legally and financially distinct. Myth number 7. Social Security is just another welfare program. There is one component that people consistently and genuinely confuse with Social Security. It is called SSI, Supplemental Security Income. SSI is a needs-based assistance program. It is means-tested, requires demonstrated financial need, and is available to people who are either disabled or 65 and older with very limited income and financial resources. The maximum SSI payment this year is $994 per month. If you know anyone receiving a Social Security-related payment below that amount, please encourage them to contact the SSA immediately to check whether they qualify for SSI as a supplement to their existing payment. Regular Social Security, retirement, and disability benefits is an entirely different structure operating under entirely different rules. These are earned benefits built through decades of personal payroll tax contributions. The benefit calculation itself is deliberately progressive, meaning people who contributed less over their working careers actually receive a higher replacement percentage of their prior earnings. If your average monthly earnings across your working life were $1,000, you receive approximately a 90% replacement rate, around $900 per month in benefits. If your average monthly earnings were $10,000, your replacement rate drops to roughly 35%, producing a monthly benefit around $3,500, not $9,000. This is an earned benefit tied directly and specifically to your own contribution history. It is not welfare. The distinction matters enormously, and deliberately blurring it is a political strategy, not an honest description of the program. Myth number 8. The Social Security Fairness Act fixed the problem. Under the previous administration, modifications were made that increased payments for certain groups who had previously received reduced benefits due to provisions called the Windfall Elimination Provision and the Government Pension Offset. Politicians called this legislation the Social Security Fairness Act. But here is what that framing leaves out. Expanding benefit payments without simultaneously establishing a corresponding funding solution to pay for that expansion accelerates the timeline to that 23% cut. More money going out without new money coming in moves the depletion date closer. Both major political parties have contributed to this problem. Neither has taken meaningful action to address the underlying funding gap. The Fairness Act did not make Social Security more solvent. It made it less so, without any honest conversation about how to offset that cost. Myth number 9. The only way to fix Social Security is to cut benefits or raise the retirement age. This is what you get when politicians announce they have tried nothing and determined that nothing can be done. The most widely supported and most mathematically straightforward solution, particularly in this community, is lifting the payroll tax cap entirely. Currently, the maximum wages subject to Social Security payroll tax is $168,600. Every dollar earned above that threshold is completely exempt from Social Security taxation. Someone earning $50,000 per year pays Social Security tax on every single dollar they earn, 365 days a year, paycheck after paycheck. Someone earning $5 million per year hits the taxable wage cap in the first 2 weeks of January, and then pays zero Social Security tax on the remaining 50 weeks of income. Their effective FICA rate ends up below 0.25% of total earnings. Eliminating that cap, requiring higher earners to contribute on the same percentage of their income that every other working American contributes, would resolve the projected funding shortfall without cutting a single benefit dollar or raising the retirement age by a single day. The reason it has not happened is not complicated. It requires wealthy individuals and their financial backers to contribute proportionally on their income. And those individuals have considerable influence over the people who write the tax code and set the rules. Myth number 10, high earners already pay their fair share into Social Security. We just addressed the arithmetic on this in detail. They do not. The payroll tax cap structure ensures that the highest earners in the country contribute the smallest fraction of their income to Social Security. That is not a matter of political interpretation. It is straightforward arithmetic that anyone can verify by looking at the numbers. A worker earning $50,000 contributes 6.2% of every dollar to Social Security. A worker earning $5 million contributes 6.2% of the first $168,600 and effectively 0% on the rest. These are not comparable contributions by any honest measure. Myth number 11, the COLA keeps up with what seniors actually experience in inflation. The cost of living adjustment is calculated using a measure of consumer prices that does not accurately reflect the actual spending patterns of retired Americans. Seniors spend proportionally more of their income on healthcare, housing, and prescription medications than the general working population does. These are categories that have experienced some of the steepest and most sustained price increases over the past decade. When those costs rise faster than the overall inflation index, seniors lose real purchasing power, even after receiving their annual COLA. There is a separate inflation index called the CPI-E, the Consumer Price Index for the elderly, specifically designed to track the spending patterns of older consumers. It consistently produces higher inflation readings than the index currently used to calculate the COLA adjustment. Using the CPI-E instead of the current measure would mean higher annual adjustments that more accurately reflect what seniors are actually experiencing at the grocery store, at the pharmacy, and at the doctor's office. The political will to make that change has not materialized because that change would cost money, and spending more on Social Security is precisely what certain political interests are working to avoid. Myth number 12. We can fix Social Security by cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. This was the promise made loudly and repeatedly during the recent DOGE initiative. The claim was that massive systemic fraud would be uncovered. People listed as 150 and 200 years old still collecting checks, hundreds of billions in fraudulent payments waiting to be recovered, and that the savings from rooting it all out would secure Social Security's finances permanently. None of that materialized, because the underlying premise was wrong. The actual measured rate of improper payments in Social Security is below 1% of total annual outlays. On roughly $1.3 trillion in annual benefit payments, less than 1% involves errors of any kind. And much of what gets counted in that error category involves voluntary overpayments, situations where someone worked slightly more than their benefit threshold allows and chose to deal with the resulting overpayment notice rather than spend hours navigating an increasingly dysfunctional phone system. Does fraud exist in the program? Of course it does. Every large government program operating at this scale has some level of fraud. The way you actually identify it and address it is by having trained, experienced investigators specifically assigned to follow up on tips, audit suspicious patterns, and investigate anomalies. You identify a claimant who appears to be working while collecting disability benefits. You investigate the facts. You bring in the Office of Inspector General when the evidence warrants it. That process requires people. Experienced, trained Social Security employees doing sustained investigative work over time. When you eliminate 7,000 employees from the agency, as has happened in recent months, you do not reduce fraud. You eliminate the institutional capacity to detect it, investigate it, and stop it. You end up with more fraud occurring, not less, because there is nobody left to catch it. Those are the 12 most common myths you will encounter when you engage with politicians on Social Security. There are plenty more where those came from, but these 12 are the ones deployed most consistently and most strategically to keep the public confused, divided, and disengaged. The reference sheet covering all 12, complete with citations from the Trustees Report, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and other primary government sources, is available in the description below. Download it. Print it out if you need to. Have it with you. The next time a politician at a town hall feeds you one of these lines, or the next time a representative staff member offers you the standard reassurances over the phone, you will have the facts immediately available to push back. Clearly, specifically, and with documentation. That is how this gets fixed. Not by waiting for politicians to develop a conscience, by making them understand that we are no longer falling for it.